Hi everybody, this week a father and son woodshop challenge. I think we should have a little woodshop competition. What should we compete on?
Coasters.
Coaster wars?
Coaster wars.
Maybe for a holiday gift exchange. You're on.
Okay, man.
You're done. You're so done.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay then. It's on. So Matt liked the idea of using some live edge tree stock because the bark was still attached in a couple of places here. So we'll put it on the mini sled and he's just going to cut one clean edge here to work with. And that'll allow him to put it on the bandsaw to cut it in half again and give him two thin pieces to work with. And he's looking for the pieces that still have the bark attached, and you'll see why in just a second. So cutting off a 45-degree angle on this piece, and it fits really nicely inside these little silicone forms that he found on the internet. And they're designed specifically for you to mix up colored epoxy, include any other interesting little artifacts that you want to add, and pour them inside these silicone forms. But it's going to look pretty cool with that live edge tree round. So he did a couple of colors. He tried a combination of a purple mica powder mixed with some gold, and that actually looked pretty cool. And then on the form to the left, he'll wind up doing some tinted green mica powder. And mica powder is that really fine dust that's colored. It's not quite like glitter, but it gives you that translucent look to the epoxy. And both of these guys are going to have to sit a while. Once they're dry, they're still pretty thick, so he ran them through the bandsaw one more time, resawing them down to just about the right thickness. And this was a double-sided piece that looked really cool with the blue epoxy. So we've got a 120 grit paper here on the belt sander, and these are pretty rough, so he's going to spend a little time getting all the bandsaw marks out of it. And then working with a couple of different grits of sandpaper, ultimately he'll get it down to the black sheet of sandpaper that's on the table here, and that's at 400 grit. And after a little handwork, of course, you can start to see the polish come into the epoxy in the wood, and it tells you it's pretty close. And the coaster's kind of stacked up, and it took their turn to be sanded. And we got a little anxious to see what it looked like, so you rub it with a little mineral spirits, and you'll see this blue colored epoxy jump out. All right, so that looks pretty good. Go ahead. I still think my stuff is going to be pretty cool. Although that looks pretty good.
I don't know. How about that one? How about that one? And how about that one, huh?
And so a little bit of an advanced look here on the backlit table, and those colors really look cool. Yeah. So probably like you, I've got a ton of these cutoff pieces in a variety of shapes and colors, different hardwoods. They're going to make a great chaos coaster. And so really similar to a project I did for my bar stool, where I used a lot of pieces and parts to put together for the stool top, I really like the look of that mixed cuts of wood all crammed together, both dowels and rectangular pieces and everything else. And I needed a way to form it all together. And just like I did for the bar stool, I'm going to use some aluminum flashing so that I can create it into a roll and create a form that way. And my goal was to have this overall form at 4 1/4 inches in diameter, because I expected to have to sand and put it on the lathe and bring it down to about 4 inches. So I measured out a 4 1/4 inch circle with my compass. Actually, this was my dad's old brass compass. Try to keep a lot of this stuff in the family if I can. And we'll just get this trimmed out and cut out on the mini bandsaw. And I had to do a little extra trimming to get it right. Get it clean and get it as round as possible. And then I sprayed some silicone sort of as a release agent, so the epoxy is going to wind up touching the aluminum. I didn't want it to completely stick, so hopefully the oil will help as a release agent when we pull it apart. And the other trouble that I had when forming the aluminum is it didn't want to obviously go completely round, so that little 1/4 inch piece of plywood helps round out the bottom, and I'm going to use these 4-inch clamps on the top to help keep the form as round as possible. And we also got to keep the epoxy from leaking out, duh. So duct tape helps with that, and it'll help me seal up the bottom, connect it to the wood, seal it up on the outside edges to the aluminum flashing, and that'll be good enough to keep the epoxy in. And there's that clamp, and it kind of brings the whole form into a cylinder shape. So now I decided to go with a mica powder in a medium blue to accent the rest of the pieces that I put in, and it was a little bit of fun to put the pieces in there. It's a little bit of an art project, figure out how best to put the pieces together, and then fill up the remaining epoxy. Now the wood tended to float, believe it or not, so I had to put a weight on top to kind of hold the pieces down. And this stuff takes 48 hours to dry. What are you going to do? And with a little tap of the hammer, I wrapped some tape around this weight so it didn't stick. And because of that release agent, I still had a little bit of trouble getting this started. So I'm in there with a screwdriver and a pair of pliers, having a little bit of fun, maybe throwing out a couple of fancy words that I wouldn't want young kids or grandchildren to hear about. And eventually I got it to the point where I could peel it back like a banana skin. And then it came off pretty easily. But it's not perfectly round, so after I remove the tape, I'm going to put a mounting plate on here so I can put it on my lathe and get the whole thing turned into a cylinder form so that it is relatively perfectly round. So we got the safety equipment on, the face shield, because these chips are going to come flying off on the backside here, and we'll basically get this cylinder cut so that it's relatively smooth and relatively round. And then we're going to use some 60 grit grinding paper here. This is really a circular disc that I folded in half, and then ultimately we'll get it down to about 220 grit that I'm showing here, and it's relatively smooth now on the perimeter. So let's get them cut. It's kind of like cutting slices of bread. So I had to set up a little bit of a sled here for the bandsaw and a stop block so that the depth of each cut was exactly the same. And these are all about 3/8 of an inch thick. And I had the same problem because of the bandsaw. You know, they leave teeth marks and cut marks, and they have to be ground down here on the belt sander. And once they were good enough, I got them over to just my handheld orbital sander, and I used 220 and then down to 320. And I really love this idea I've seen from other woodworkers by using a box fan, a little 20 by 20 box fan with an air filter to catch some of that dust. And then I finished it off with 4 coats of semi-gloss spray lacquer on both sides. And I really like how these turned out. So it's a great argument. I think these look fantastic. I think Matt's project looks fantastic too. but it's hard to give in and say he won. So I'm not gonna. It's time for you to vote. Send us a comment and let us know who you think won, either Matt or Dad. Matt's stuff on the left and Dad's stuff on the right. I think both are going to make great additions to our cabin. We needed some coasters for the cabin. I think Matt is going to include some of his coasters as a gift for Christmas. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for the video. We really hope you liked it, and we also hope you subscribe to the channel. Take care.